Now, time to speak to the government. This morning, I'm joined by the Trade Policy Minister, Douglas Alexander. Very good morning to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. I'm going to start by asking you about Angela Rayner and her admission this week that she's underpaid her stamp duty. When she spoke to our political editor, Beth Rigby, earlier in the week, she said that was because she'd relied on advice that turned out to be wrong. Now we learn that the firm that did the conveyancing for her in the purchase of the flat in Hove, they say that they didn't give her tax advice and they're being used as scapegoats. Dorries are saying that she's being dishonest. Do you agree that the pressure is building on her with this?
So I watched that interview with Beth Rigby. I thought it was incidentally a brilliant interview, but I don't really know any more than what I've observed by watching Sky or reading the media reports. The person who needs to get to the bottom of this is Sir Laurie Magnus. He's the independent advisor on ministerial standards. And what we've seen is Angela Rayner realise, not least in light of press scrutiny, that there was an issue. She sought advice. She has taken that advice and on that basis of advice has referred herself to this office, the Office of the Independent Advisor on Ministerial Standards. Sir Laurie Magnus's job is to establish all of the facts. Who knew what when, who spoke to who, what advice was given. He will come to a conclusion, he'll pass his advice to the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister will make a judgment. OK, so if it's all down to Sir Laurie Magnus's investigation, if he is to find that she has broken the ministerial code, should she be sacked? Well, all of these matters are a matter for the Prime Minister. I'm the Trade Minister.
But what do you think?
No,
I mean, if she's broken the ministerial code...
I'm the Trade Minister, not the Prime Minister. The truth is, you're inviting me, and I understand why you're doing it, to speculate and anticipate the end of a process when we're still in that process. My sense is Sir Laurie Magnus works in a very comprehensive way, but also in a pretty expeditious way. So I don't think we'll have to wait too long. And I don't think it would be appropriate for ministers to be prejudging that, speculating on what could be a range of findings or conclusions that were reached by Sir Laurie Magnus. We should allow him to do the job rather than anticipate that conclusion. OK, but the Prime Minister was asked about this and he did say he would act on Sir Laurie Magnus's findings. And he, in the past, has been incredibly critical of his opponents in cases like this. He was very critical of Boris Johnson, for example, when Priti Patel was found to have broken the ministerial code and she wasn't sacked. So would you expect him to act? In the previous government, there seemed to be a tendency to dismiss the ethics advisor rather than to dismiss the ministers. 2 previous independent advisors resigned under the Conservative Party. Listen, nobody questions the fact that these issues always arise in the course of a parliament. The real test for a government is not do these issues arise, but how does the government deal with them? And actually what Sir Keir Starmer said when he was the leader of the opposition was he would strengthen the office of the independent advisor and he would strengthen the ministerial code. We've done both of those things. He then said that ministers should be able to self-refer themselves to Sir Laurie Magnus. That's exactly what Angela Rayner has done. And there is a process that is now followed. So I understand why people will say, is there an equivalence between what we saw with the law-breaking in Downing Street under Boris Johnson or the PPE contracts that were handed out to their mates during COVID? No, I'm talking about someone who was found to have broken the ministerial code and wasn't sacked. And yes. The Prime Minister was critical of that, so you'd assume that he would follow the same rules. The Prime Minister said that he is prepared to act. I'm not going to prejudge either the Sir Laurie Magnus inquiry or, respectfully, I'm not going to prejudge any determination made by the Prime Minister. It will be a matter for the Prime Minister. However, whatever Sir Laurie Magnus determines, how do you think it looks to have a housing secretary that has underpaid a key housing tax stamp duty by £40,000? I mean, either way, she says she relied on advice that turned out to be wrong, but shouldn't she have made sure that she was absolutely right? Wouldn't that be Well, I'd make a couple of points. Firstly, I get it. No one wants these headlines, least of all Angela Rayner or any other member of the government or supporter of the Labour Party who want to be focused on other issues. So I totally recognise that. But on the other hand, respectfully, one of the reasons that you use a lawyer or an accountant is to get advice on the basis of transactions or whatever it is that you're doing. And I think the right thing is to let Sir Laurie Magnus undertake that investigation. But what I'm trying to say is she's a prominent member of a government that is putting up taxes for various people, and yet she's not paying the full amount. It's not a great look, is it? Of course it's not what she would have chosen or any of us would have chosen. But as soon as it became clear that there was an issue, she sought further independent legal advice, I think from a King's Counsel, When the King's Counsel produced that report on Wednesday, she immediately referred herself to the Independent Advisor on Ministerial Standards. She is in touch with HMRC in terms of making good the payment that requires to be made in relation to stamp duty. This happened in a matter of days and hours. Frankly, that's a pretty stark contrast from what we've seen in the past, which was that it took sometimes months for ministers to be dragged to a position of accountability. Of course, Angela has made a mistake. She has acknowledged that on Sky News. The reality is, having made that mistake and realised that she had made that mistake on the basis of the advice she got from the KC, she immediately referred herself to a process that's now still underway.
OK. A couple of other issues I just want to ask you about. Sky News understands that Israel's President, Isaac Herzog, will visit the UK next week. Can you confirm he'll be meeting ministers?
I'm genuinely not sure in terms of what the schedule is, but I'd make a pretty basic point. First of all, diplomacy involves meeting people with whom you disagree, and the British government has very strong views in terms of the present conduct of the government of Israel, whether that is the sanctioning of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, whether that is the demand that aid should be allowed into Gaza for what is a man-made famine, or just the tireless work the Prime Minister is conducting, often far away from the headlines, to try and get an immediate ceasefire and a path towards that two-state solution. So when I was in government previously, I met with Yasser Arafat, I met with Abu Mazen, the head of the Palestinian Authority. It is right that we are engaging with politicians from across the region because the suffering is incalculable and needs to stop.
So you don't think it's mixed messages then when the UK looks like it's about to recognise the Palestinian state to be meeting the President of Israel?
Well, it has been for decades the position of all British governments that we want a two-state solution. In order to get to a path to that two-state solution, of course you're going to have to be talking not just to the Palestinians, but also to the Israelis.
What are your thoughts on Nadine Dorries' defection to reform?
Well, Nadine Dorries doesn't really strike me as the future of British politics. Leopards don't tend to change their spots. And in that sense, what it confirms to me is it's the same old Tories flying under a different flag. You know, if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, tends to be a duck. And in that sense, Reform are trying to say we're something fundamentally different. But Nadine Dorries is indelibly associated with the chaos, the decline and the problems that we're spending every waking day trying to clean up. So in that sense, I think it's more of a challenge for Reform than a benefit for Reform to be so associated with the abject record of failure of the government of which Nadine Dorries was part.
Reform will be very happy that they're winning over supporters of other parties, and polling suggests that there are many Labour voters that are looking to vote Reform next time round. I mean, that's a pretty damning indictment of your first year in government, isn't it? Especially after you won such a big majority just a year ago.
Well, we didn't get into the decline that Britain was suffering when we were elected in July 2024 overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. We've started the work of rebuilding our country and the renewal of our country. But in time, at the conclusion of this Parliament, there'll be a pretty fundamental choice. Do you want politicians who are focused on, if you like, solving problems or exploiting problems? If you look at Nigel Farage this week, he's been trash-talking the UK in front of the US Congress. The contrast to me is pretty clear. I began the week in Tokyo Bay on board HMS Prince of Wales, the flagship of the Royal Navy, with John Healey, our Defence Secretary. John Healey was in Japan, beating the drum and making the case for British business. I think in time, in the fullness of time over this Parliament, Britain will want politicians who are solving problems, not just exploiting problems, who are more interested in making a difference than making headlines. And Nigel Farage can fire up the grievance machine. I expect he'll do so again this weekend. But the fact is, Nadine Dorries is indelibly associated with an abject record of failure, and he now owns her and owns those problems.
OK, well, Douglas Alexander, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.